What are kids like? How do they learn? The way that we answer these questions matters a lot. These are fundamental questions about education and working inside of it. And no matter what your role, the way that you answer these influences how you do it. All of us believe things about what children are like and how they learn. And we come to this from a variety of sources. So, for example, some of us approach this artistically, some of it as craftspeople. Others really emphasize the degree to which our journey and experience teaches us about children and how they learn. And then still others of us draw heavily upon science. What we want to do in the CSPS focus for the next few weeks is to focus in on this bottom right hand corner. We want to ask ourselves, what is the science of learning that is being talked about more and more at the national level? Why might it matter for us? How does it actually connect with what we're doing? And in today's session, I want to look at just should we even pay much attention to this at all? So I hope that by the time we're done with the next few minutes, you and I will be really clear on what we mean when we talk about the science of learning together. And then it won't be like this yucky or unclear term that we just kind of miss each other on communicatively. So it's first really important for us to be clear about what kind of science we're talking about when we talk about a science of learning. Okay. There are two types of science that are frequently discussed and confused with each other when it comes to discussing the science of learning. And I want to make sure that we don't do that because it'll just get in our way. So, one kind of science that gets talked about a lot are empirical generalizations. Okay. These are things that in a variety of contexts and student groups and task types and experimental settings, scientists observe again and again and again and again. So these are really consistent observations. Empirical generalizations describe what science has kind of settled on. And that's a huge benefit of empirical generalizations. They're settled science. So we don't have to be too uncertain about whether or not they'll be disproven anytime soon because they've been so consistently observed. A big problem with empirical generalizations, though, is that they only apply to a single aspect of super complicated situations, like, those situations that exist anytime that you or I talk with a young person and try to help them to learn. That is an amazingly complex situation, and empirical generalizations only tell us one thing about that situation. So that's a pretty big weakness. Now, the other kind of statement that we have to understand are theoretical statements. So theories take a big old cluster of empirical generalizations and they try to put them together into something coherent. And this is really important. Scientists make theoretical statements so that in an effort to predict what the outcome of future research might look like. Okay. So they create coherence out of all these little kind of isolated empirical generalizations. And then they do that so that they can make a path really for the science to explore in the future. So a big strength of theoretical statements is that they integrate and coordinate all these disparate observations that scientists have made in the science of learning. And that's good because chaos is not friendly to the human mind. And when we're confused, we tend to go focus on something that we can understand. A big weakness, though, with theoretical statements is that scientists use these to predict. And so as a result, they are sometimes wrong. Let me give you a really famous example that I'm positive you probably learned about in your educational psychology classes back in the day. So this is the Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. And Piaget, back in like the 60s and 70s, famously observed that the children that he was working with it seemed that their cognition developed in stages. And so Piaget's theory of cognitive development was basically that there's a really concrete stage of cognitive development, and then this pretty abrupt and rapid transition happens. And now students are able to engage, for example, more abstract thinking. So this is a really widespread concept in education today. And the only problem with it is that it's wrong. After Piaget's death in 1980, scientists started to observe, they started to develop experiments to test Piaget's theory that cognition doesn't actually move in these discrete stages with these really short transitory moments where the stages change. And so that this Piaget's theory of development is just an illustrative example of why we don't want to depend so much on theoretical statements as we do on empirical generalizations. So when we ask ourselves, what are kids like and how do they learn? And we want to bring science in to inform how we answer that question. Clearly, the things that we want to emphasize are empirical generalizations. So when we look at the science of learning over the next few weeks through CSPS Focus, we're going to just examine empirical generalizations. That means we're just going to look at the things that describe reality, describe what kids are like, describe how they learn. So the application of these empirical generalizations, that's going to be up to you and me. That's where we get to be artistic and playful and experimental and bring our craft and our experience to bear. The application is the really fun part. But we're going to use as the campfire, as the kindling for our brainstorms and our learning. We're going to use empirical generalizations to do that. And we're going to do a bunch of other stuff too. Look at all these things that we're going to do. Isn't it going to be sweet? So I hope that you're excited to look at the science of learning in the weeks to come. And I hope that you'll participate. And I hope that you'll go find a colleague who's not too participatory in the old, discussion, and just bring them along and say, hey, let's have some fun. Let's have some great conversation with their colleagues all around the district. And whether or not you're teaching our youngest learners in a classroom or our oldest learners as a school counselor, I really hope that, and I think that there's something in store for you in this series. All right, take care. And you know what? Reduce it to a bumper sticker. If you had to take this little bit that we've done on the science of learning and boil it down to a bumper sticker, what would your bumper sticker say and why?